Hey everybody, welcome to Surface Level, a show that takes a look at society's expectations and rejects the ones we don't see it for, all from the perspective of three black queer best friends. I'm one of your hosts, Damon, and today, Tony, Jordan, and I are discussing violence within intimate relationships. What has our experience been with intimate partner violence? What unique factors are in play when violence includes two gay men? This is Kiss with the Fist. Kiss with the Fist. Okay, so serious topic today, but like all black queer people, we're gonna have a little bit of joy in the storm still and play a game.
Let's smile a little bit, child, please.
So,
okay. Don't take my joy.
We'll never take your joy. So we're gonna start with a new version of this or that. We're gonna call it the lesser of two evils.
Ooh.
So I'll give you a scenario. Stop, Jordan. Stop looking at the screen, trying to pick ahead of time. And you have to pick one. There is no getting around it. You cannot.
You can't plead the fifth?
No, you can't plead the fifth.
Watch me.
What's going to happen if I don't?
Shall I will say never mind. All right. So first scenario. Have dinner with Donald Trump or Mitch McConnell?
Oh, baby girl.
Tony.
Oh, child. Wow, nah, that's why you gonna come to me first? I don't know. The lesser of two evils, and these are two evils. you did a great job on that.
I know.
I'm gonna just say Mitch McConnell.
That's all she got.
Yeah,
Jordan.
Yeah, I think I'll say Mitch McConnell. I feel like he might go to sleep at dinner. And then I can just, use that card, swipe them tags.
I also would say Mitch McConnell, but because I actually would like to have dinner with Mitch McConnell.
Oh,
because
please explain.
As much as we don't agree on anything, and I hate his belief system is, he is a masterful politician.
Absolutely.
Nobody can use the Senate better than Mitch McConnell.
She uses her evil powers
for
evil,
for absolute pentacle,
total destruction.
So as much as
she's like plankton. SpongeBob.
As much as I hate the girl and what she stands for, can't deny she's a great politician. All right, next scenario. Instead of Howard, to have attended Hampton or Morehouse. Jordan.
For you to call these two schools.
The girl's going to be mad.
It's going to be hate mail. Definitely Morehouse. I would need to just be in a bigger city with something going on. I imagine that Hampton is just like in Hampton. Mm-hmm. But Atlanta, you could do some other things. You can go to Chateau Chirac.
Well, you see, I'm gonna let Jordan tell that story because I'm gonna go to Morehouse because of the men.
Mm-hmm. Of course, a Morehouse man.
Yeah, I'm
on the street, Jordan.
And I
like some Morehouse man.
I respect. Sometimes. I respect because I have friends that went. I have friends that went to both, but I kind of love the city of Atlanta. Atlanta. And we have a lot of girlfriends over at Spelman. It'd be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. I would say Morehouse is actually my second choice for college behind Howard.
Clark Atlanta was mine.
Ooh.
Hampton was mine. But I have wisdom.
But I'm so glad
that I went to Howard.
And not any place else.
It's not always about Howard.
Anyway, yes, it
Says
is.
who?
Howard's not the only HBCU. Moving on. So if you were to have caught the coronavirus and you were to have a lingering symptom forever of not being able to smell or not being able to taste, what would you pick? Jordan?
How does that work?
Well, scientifically,
I was like,
taste is linked to smell.
Right. That's why I was like, how does that work?
Girl, just pick the fucking answer.
I don't like the question.
don't matter. Just not.
Because I was going to examine the question too. Can I approach the bar? Your Honor.
Maybe.
The bench.
Maybe. I would. Wait, what? What's the question?
You are so confused right now.
I am.
Would you rather not be able to smell or not be able to taste?
I'd rather not be able to smell.
Okay.
Sure. Tony.
There's nothing worse than not being able to taste your food when you're sick, and we've all
I'm thinking
that
about I like a
God.
fine dining experience. I need to be able to eat a little something.
Fine dining.
You like to eat a little something.
This girl orders Thai every week. She'll be eating fine dining.
It's the best Thai in a 4-block radius.
Timon, what about you?
Smell. I don't need smell no roses, child. So next, go all summer with no AC or all winter with no heat.
Ooh.
Tony.
I'm gonna choose all summer with no AC because in the winter I cannot be in a freezing cold home. And in the summer I can, be a girl about town. And go. I'll be a girl about town and go visit.
Do not look at me like that.
Come over to Jordan's place. I'm gonna come over to Damon's
Come
place.
to my house, try to use up my AC.
I'll find some dates. Like
Some dates with AC.
Very expensive dates.
Jordan.
Definitely. I can go without AC. I've done that many years in my life. So, but yeah, I can't be cold though because I will like literally cry
and shut down.
I would go without the heat. Because I feel like I could put more blankets and stuff on. But if I get too hot in my house in the summer, you just hot.
Ooh, you ever
Once
had
you get
cold
naked,
feet?
you're just hot.
You could get into a cold shower or something. Get some ice cream.
All right. Spend the rest of your life in a physically monogamous relationship with a total top or total bottom. Jordan.
That's interesting.
Spend the rest of my life. A total bottom.
Tony.
The rest of my life.
Why the girls acting like they can't hear it now?
It's definitely not ideal. But if I had to choose one.
If I had to choose one, I'm going to choose a total top.
Same.
Because you ain't going to be...
Girl. You ain't going to be what?
Next question. We're moving on. All right. Would you rather debate Beyonce with the Beehive or Nicki Minaj with the Barb? Tony.
Wait.
Would you rather debate about Beyonce with the Beehive or Nicki Minaj with the Barb?
I'd rather debate about something that has
No, you only have 2 options.
legs to stand on.
You only have 2 options.
I'm getting there.
Oh.
I'd rather debate, like, if I'm debating with the Beehive about Beyonce, I'm for Beyonce.
Or against.
Or against. So either way.
Just in the debate.
Yeah, I'd rather debate about all things Beyonce versus... what's her face? No, I like Nicki Minaj, but I don't want to debate about her. No,
Jordan.
I don't want the smoke from the Barbs, so Beehive is fine with me.
Yeah, if I could never speak to a Barb again in my life, it'd be fine.
Okay, well that was fun.
And this is Jordan's last scene in his last season.
This is my last episode. I'm actually a very, kosher Barb.
She has cursed me out about Nicki Minaj.
You deserved it.
We got 2 more. All right. So only drink rail liquor.
Ooh, the other one.
Or boxed wine. Or Carlos Rossi for the rest of your life.
Rossi.
Jordan.
Ooh.
The ghetto.
Box wine.
Yeah, absolutely box wine. I could tolerate that.
I feel like I get sick trying to...
You're going to get sick on Belikov, too?
No. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. I'm saying the boxed wine, I feel like I could make my way through that.
I can do some Colorado. You can judge it up.
I can make some sangria.
Right. You can mix some cranberries into something. Turn it into a spritz.
Right.
Okay, last one. And this is a little throwback. Earth-shattering romance with uncertainty or even-keeled affection with stability?
Even killed affection with stability.
Yeah, stability. I agree with that because stability is important to me. So
absolutely, not gonna be wrecking my life.
I don't want nothing earth shattering. It ain't that. It's not that stunning.
I'm going with earth shattering romance. I don't want to be bored. I told y'all that in the first episode. Bored.
You rather have a bad romance.
I could shatter my
mama. Okay, so we are going to move into a discussion around experiences we've had in relationships and experiences generally that are tied to a lot of people around domestic violence and what that looks like for people. So, starting more generally, do you think there are unique factors that drive specifically queer men to engage in violence in relationships? So, Tony, maybe we start with you.
Well, that's the way you ask that question is interesting because the gays are a unique species, right? So there's a lot of different factors that might be thrown into that are variables as to why gay men might engage in violence, gay on gay violence. But I do think that everyone's a human being, and I think with taking the gay out of it, just men and women are different. individually as well. So there's testosterone that comes into play. Like there's the alpha male, there's all that stuff. But I think in terms of the violence, a lot of that has to do with the upbringing, in my opinion, and what you're exposed to as a child. And I think that just in generally speaking, a lot of how people move as adults has to do with how they were raised as children, and how they were, how they come through life and the things that they've learned and the experiences that they've had. So I don't know if there's anything that unique that I could pinpoint, but that's where I think my answer lies in, is just like the upbringing. So Jordan, what do you think?
Yeah. I think that there is a perception of less consequences when there's violence between gay men. I think that there are it's very clearly understood that if a man and a woman who are in a relationship get into violence, there are very clear legal and societal consequences for the man, right? I think when it comes to male-on-male violence, I think it's easier to not address it or just chalk it up to boys being boys or just call it simply a fight. And also, I think that a lot of gay men they probably grew up with this like fight or flight sort of mentality, whether or not they had to defend themselves against bullying. I also think that boys are encouraged more to quote unquote stand up for themselves, whereas I think that women are sometimes taught more so to be ladylike and to not fight. So I just think that overall, like, violence is probably going to show up more with men. I could be wrong, but it feels like that.
You talked to a girl from the Bronx or from Brooklyn.
Motherfucking New York.
Well, New York is a very different moment.
Or Chicago, a lot of these cities, child. There's a lot of women would beat your ass.
Oh, I know.
No, I think I agree with a lot of the sentiment Jordan just mentioned. I think men are raised in this in society. It's like you settle things through fisticuffs. We're like, if you're fighting, like I remember being a kid, and my dad would be like, if I'm like, oh, he hit me, I'm afraid. He's like, well, no, you need to go outside and handle that. And I'm like, he's bigger than me. He's just like, why you think I got all them bats in the garage? Oh my God. And I remember, like, it was just this thing about, like, don't come home crying to me about you are fighting. He's like, you need to handle that. And I think that's the thing that a lot of men in our community have had to unlearn, but I think it's also something that people haven't unlearned and then take into relationships. Yeah. And you think, oh, I need to settle a dispute by being the strongest one or being the most alpha male, as you mentioned, Tony. So I definitely think that's a dynamic that plays into queer relationships between men.
Right. I mean, emotions run high in queer relationships, but specifically talking about men, when those emotions run high, sometimes the circumstance drives you to act out of character. You might not be a person that's ever been violent or like has physically, been in an altercation with someone, but in that relationship, you came undone because of the emotion involved in it. And that does take you to a place. I can say that.
Yeah. So if anyone here ever had like a personal experience with domestic violence in relationships, Tony, do you want to start?
I can start because fortunately for me, no one has ever put their hands on me in a way that I didn't permit, if you know what I mean. So but that being said, though, I have been in two situations that I'll talk about that I think are a form of violence, but not necessarily physical, but more like on the mental side. So there was a time when I was in college, and there was a younger guy that I was messing with, and he, I guess, came from a broken home. And when I kind of was like through with him, like it was giving, I'm on to the next, I don't want to be involved, he was very emotional about it and spoke to me like, you're all I have, I don't have anyone else, how could you do this to me? And he would literally, it became harassment. Like, he was calling me, telling me that basically he was going to harm himself. I was fearful that he might like commit suicide or something. And that was very difficult for me to deal with, because while I didn't want to deal with him, and I wasn't handling it in a way that was like, well, fuck you, I was just being like, this is done. This is over. We have to move on. It scared me that I thought that he might take his life because of me. But then I had to completely remove myself from the situation and just be like, if whatever he decides to do and take into his own hands is actually, it's not my fault. So that's one situation where I think it was a little bit more mentally, more of a mental struggle and challenge for me. The other situation is just when I've been in situations with guys where I feel like they're like what's the thing about lying? Habitual liar, or they just. And so for me, it's like I'm catching you in these lies, and when I confront you about lies, you're constantly making it seem out to be that I'm like imagining things. Like I saw things I imagined, given Solange. And I think that, and I think mentally that takes a toll when you're with someone and they're constantly making you out to be the bad guy when you're bringing up facts and when you know the truth about things.
Gaslighting.
Oh, and for me, you feel stuck. You feel like, what's going on? Am I imagining things? So it's more on the physical, on the mental side, because I think that's also, like, we automatically think about, physical harm, but there's mental that's involved. That's also a strain.
Yeah.
Jordan?
Yes, I have been in a physically violent situation with a partner in the past. It only happened once, but it happened.
All right. And yeah, I've had multiple situations that have become physically violent. Once with someone I was dating, that was a one-off situation, and in a time where I decided I didn't want to be with him anymore, and it turned into like him having a total meltdown and becoming violent towards me. And once in a long-term relationship where things happened over time and continuously, not always consistently, but definitely not a one-time thing, and led to really fucking me up in a lot of ways, I think, in that experience, and trying to figure myself out. I think, and like to pivot a touch, oftentimes people ask, like, are there red flags? Are there things that you may have seen from a partner or from someone you were dating less closely, that did you ignore something? Do you feel like there was something, maybe let's start with you, Jordan, that you could have seen that foretold that something like that would come?
Yeah, the writings were on the wall. It wasn't even like a red flag. It was a red billboard.
Blaring.
It was. I'm actually. I think that there were a lot of red flags. A lot of which I actually brought up with the person. I think that the person was open with me about their history with violence. But and I brought up, I was like, it sounds like you're the issue. I brought that up, but for some reason, you guys know me. Like, I won't engage in a altercation to the point where I feel like it'll get violent. Like, I typically will just be like, okay, well, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
And I had this mentality that, like, okay, like, you may have been violent before, but it's not going to happen with me, because I know how to diffuse situations. And if the situation isn't diffusing, I know how to leave.
Yeah.
And I think that the reason why I ignored it is because even though, he had this experience with violence that he told me about, and I heard it with my real ears, it was just like a very intense relationship. Very short relationship, but very intense. He treated me like I was the only guy in the world. And at this time, I was in college, and I had never really experienced that level of affection. And I think that I became sort of reliant on that level of attention. And when I didn't necessarily reciprocate, that same level of intensity, I think that that's where the disconnect and the anger started coming in.
Yeah.
Ooh, that trauma, like that's and but do you think that had anything to do with, like, if you weren't feeling it as much as he was, for him to get to a level of in which he responded to you, like, kind of not reciprocating, like, did you think that was your fault? Did you feel like I should probably lean in, love him more? Like, I should fake the funk?
I actually did stay in the relationship for a little bit longer than I wanted to, but it was out of fear. Um, and similar to one of Damon's experiences, the violent act happened after I, wanted to leave
Right.
the relationship. And immediately when I expressed that I wasn't interested in staying in the relationship, that's when I started getting threats for to blackmail me. Essentially just sort of like tell everybody that I know or that I was gay. This happened to me in college. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I stayed for a little bit longer, but it was in an effort to protect the privacy of my sexuality.
That makes sense.
And then also to figure out a better way to remove this guy from my life.
Right.
And I thought that maybe if I had a little bit more time, I could figure out a way to get out of the relationship in a way that didn't make him as upset.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think, like you said it, we always see the signs, don't we? Or sometimes we don't. But I think a lot of times there are breadcrumbs that are left. There are things that, like, personally speaking, for me, with one situation, I felt like I was in a bit of a bubble where certain things I didn't really see or wasn't privy to. And in that case, I didn't. But then I had friends around me slowly but surely tell me this was going on. Like, friends that didn't want to say anything initially, but later on came and said, I have to tell you this as a friend. Like, I love your love and I want you to be happy, but I would be remiss and a bad friend if I don't let you know what I'm seeing. And so I started to see things on my own after that. And then I would confront the person I was with, and things were flipped on its head. And it was it pit me against myself to make me question, like, what I was thinking. And I chose to ignore and brush things under the rug because no relationship is perfect. And I feel like in order to build something, you got to work through those thoughts and those times. Right. And that's a part of building that strong union. Getting over those humps, and that is what makes you stronger. But at the same time, it could hold you in a bad situation.
Yeah.
Damon, what about you?
I think I actually don't feel like there were red flags. I think that, and for me, this is part of the complexity of this conversation. I think we always assume that abuse or an abusive person looks like a certain thing. Mm-hmm. Like it's the boogeyman, or like it's like if it's Ike and Tina, or it's like you see this like evilness bubbling under with a person.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, at least in my experience, what had happened is that the current situation manifests itself that way. Not like some long festering thing that I could tie the experience to. And what I actually saw was the bigger issue that I had in my relationship was not about ignoring things in the beginning, but once I knew what was happening, at that point, not recognizing when something was broken beyond repair.
Mm-hmm. That's important.
Yeah. I think that I kept trying to fix a situation to the point where I was afraid of my partner. Mm-hmm. And we'd get into like just a normal tiff, like not even an argument. And I just remember being deathly afraid of like what could happen or what this could spiral into. And I think being in that place was just something that I in hindsight's always 20/20. It was just like that was the point when I should have walked away.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of leads into our next question about having returned in a relationship that became physically abusive, or what led to that decision. I guess it's about me now, since everyone else seemed to
because I was getting ready to say
walk away
and to return to a situation like I would have to be stigmatized or like something like that.
No, but it's not. This is interesting. So I was reading an article in the New York Times a few months ago, and Cori Bush, she is in the freshman House representative she's a Black Lives Matter activist from Missouri. Mm-hmm. And after the Twigs story came out about Shia LaBeouf, they wrote an article and she was interviewed about her experience with abuse, and she mentioned something that I'd never really thought about, the idea of coercive control. And when people are always like, oh, you were in an abusive relationship or things were happening to you, why didn't you just walk away? And she was saying they were in this cycle of the partner being abusive towards her. She obviously becoming upset, and then the partner turning that abuse onto themselves. And then even in that scenario, even though you are the person feeling like this violence or this trauma towards you, you still love that person. Like that, and you then at that point become the person like, oh, are you okay? And then kind of the cycle goes around and around in that way. And I think people often oversimplify the topic and believe that because this happened, then you immediately hate a person.
Well, but I'm thinking more so along the lines of like, what's going on with yourself, where you like, what's your own trauma that you feel like you are not worthy of having better, of going back to a situation or finding a new situation without that abuse. I kind of that's where my mind is going, is like that introspection of like what's going on with the person that goes back to a situation like that.
Well,
I think that's putting the pressure and the onus on the wrong thing. I think that unless
but you don't think that's valid, that there's some trauma that the individual might have.
No,
that
I think it's valid.
Maybe not have confronted for themselves.
I think it's valid, but I think the experience of abuse and the experience of going around in a cycle with someone you care about who is also inflicting harm is something that will have you very mixed up in how you think you should react to things. I think that we often assume that if somebody do this to me, I ain't taking it and blah, blah, blah. It's just like that, yes, that level of power you want to own and you want to have, but that's very theoretical. I think when you are in maybe years down the road with someone and then it turns in a way that becomes very negative quickly and you almost don't even realize it's happening. Like you can get stuck in something and not recognize that you are losing so much of the person that you should be, or the person that you think you are, that you are losing some of the value that you should prescribe upon yourself. And I think that with a lot of complex relationships, you can find yourself in a place where you feel super fucking lost, and you are invested in hopefully trying to help someone else and not really even thinking about yourself.
Yeah, I can agree with that, because even though I never re-entered a relationship with the guy that I was telling the story about earlier, I did go back and see him maybe 4 or 5 times over the course of a few years after the violent incident. And one time even like driving 5 hours to see him. And a part of it was feeling like he needed me, you know, and he made that very clear in the endless text messages and emails and everything else. And I did feel bad, and I did incorporate, or I did consider, you know, his family life and all the things that he was dealing with. I didn't see him as just this violent person. I saw him as this person that like really needed help and didn't have anyone.
Yeah.
And a part of me felt needed. A part of me felt selfish that I felt so needed. And I think that sort of I sort of convinced myself that maybe I could try again, and maybe I can just like figure out new ways to avoid disagreements or arguments. And I mean, long story short, I took that 5-hour drive and I came back. I did a round trip within 90 minutes because we got into like an argument that was turning into an aggressive situation.
But isn't that a part of like that cycle, like Damon was kind of describing, is it because of the situation and the love that's involved, you psych yourself out by thinking like you think that they need you in order to exist, and because you love them, you go back to a situation and it's kind of like, oh, now I'm back to, you know, square one,
yeah,
where I didn't want to be.
But square one could be where you want it to be. Like that. Like I think that's the part of the cycle that's the really complex part. Like you can go around like be abused, someone turns violence toward themselves, then you feel empathy and sadness for them, and then they start becoming the nice person that they were, and then you're back in the place of like seeing the good parts of that person.
But that's what I'm saying.
And-
Like
but-
that person has issues, and you're roped. It ropes you into their cycle because they haven't dealt with their shit. You might have your own shit too, but you're in their cycle. Like
Yeah.
they are, turning those wheels.
Yeah. Like, do you think that someone receiving abuse bears fault in the situation?
I believe that in every situation there are two contributing sides to it. Both parties are giving a level of energy to the situation. Obviously, everyone brings their own baggage. But I think it depends on that. Like I don't know if I can give a straight answer on if the person being abused is, bears any of the fault, because I think it really is situational. But that's why I think it's important, like you guys know better than me because you've been to therapy. So I think it's important for us to learn who we are and learn what baggage we're bringing to the table so that we can identify that baggage and be upfront about that baggage. And that allows you to exist with someone else in a more clear, aware state of mind. So,
Jordan, what about you?
I think a vast majority of the time the answer is no. That's my opinion. I see a lot of self-help resources that says it's not your fault. But there are times where I do feel like someone receiving abuse could be at fault. And the one thing that I want to focus on today is people who initiate violence but lose the fight. So they're viewed as the victim of abuse. I have a huge issue with that. I think that everyone needs to keep their hands to themselves. You should not think that because you are the smaller one, and I'm talking about gay relationships specifically, because you are the smaller one, because you are the more feminine presenting one, whatever reason you put in your head why the other person shouldn't hit you back or hit you as hard, it doesn't hold any weight for me. I think that everybody needs to keep their hands to themselves. And I'm not saying I absolutely do not wish violence on anyone. But I think that we all have a responsibility to not initiate violence. So I just wanted to make that point because I think that a lot of times when you look at, your abuse situations, you assume that the person that suffered more injury, more physical injury, should be the person that receives more sympathy or the person that's the victim. And, while I think that vast majority, there is no good reason to be violent with someone else. I think that those little instances, we need to make sure that we're holding people accountable.
Yeah.
I think that humans, at the end of the day, you have to take responsibility for your own safety because that's what you can control. And sometimes that's fucking hard. I think you can get stuck in something because you care about a person and put your own safety below their pain. And I think, I found myself in a relationship where it had gotten violent, and I just started to do things where I felt like I was losing myself and acting out of character. Like I stepped out of cheated on my boyfriend with a friend. Like I became so fucking nasty, and we would fight for hours and just scream and scream and scream. And there was this desire to feel some level of power in the situation. I think in cheating, there was this desire to feel like I have agency over my own body. And I think being male and being constantly told that you are growing up and you're you are physically strong or you're supposed to be physically dominant, all the bullshit that's fed into us when you as a man, because of that, feel like you're not in control of like your physical self,
Yeah.
it will fuck with you in a way that was just like, okay, well, I'm gonna mess around with this person just because I want to do something that you have no control over. And that to me was something that really fucked me up. And I just remember taking a look at myself one day and going like, what am I becoming as a result of this?
Right.
Like, where is my belief or value system or how I want to treat people, period? How that is getting so lost in this because I'm not taking the space to step away for me and to be responsible for the way that I want to move throughout the world.
Yeah.
And that was really a really hard lesson for me. And I think it kind of moves into like, do we think is the topic taken less seriously because it's two men? Like, are we not valuing it in the same way that we, to Jordan's earlier point around sexual relationships between a man and a woman? Jordan, maybe let's keep to you this time.
Yeah, I mean, I said it earlier. I think that when it's two men, a lot of times it's labeled as a fight. And I think that when it's between a man and a woman, it's labeled as abuse. And I think that small nuance and terminology establishes which one should receive more sympathy and more urgency and more attention. And yeah, I just think that even, relationships that are abusive between men and women, like the man, like his life goes up in flames, as it should. There should be severe consequences, but I think that in these male on male relationships, sometimes it seems like it didn't even happen.
Yeah. Tony?
I think that as it pertains to it not being like this topic not being taken seriously in relationships between two men, like, first of all, this is a conversation that's not so openly had.
Yeah.
I have, and you guys have, we have a ton of gay male friends, and I have rarely, like, outside of my conversations with like you, Damon, and you, Jordan, but like beyond that, this is a conversation that I've not had with others. And we know that intimate partner violence is prevalent in our community. For example, I found one of the last major studies that the CDC did talked about domestic violence in the United States, that 26% of gay men said that they experienced physical violence or stalking or rape by their partners. And I don't know if that number is up or down since the study took place, but 26% may sound like a small amount, but in the grand scheme of things,
Right.
it's a lot more than what people are giving credit to. And so I'm just proud of us for bringing this to the forefront and for you guys to outwardly talk about the experiences you had with intimate partner violence, because it's important. And yes, I do agree with what Jordan is saying. Like, when it's man and woman, it's viewed as one thing. When it's two guys, it's viewed as it's just a fight. But I think the more that we normalize these conversations and bring them to light, the more that it can be visible and it can be seen as what it is. So hopefully the narrative can start to change, and we can be having these types of conversations more openly.
Yeah.
Damon, what do you think?
I mean, I don't have much to add to that. I think the shit happens. I think let's be more open about discussing it. Let's take people seriously when they are brave enough to discuss it. And let's not have as much shame if you feel like you've gone through that in a relationship and you're not less of a man or less of a person. Because, like, what does it really mean to be a man? We're all just human. And that's what I have to say. And I want to close with something that we try and uplift. So are there things that we would say to someone who is maybe currently experiencing violence or in the process of healing, either from our experiences or just how we view the world? So, Jordan, we can start.
I want to give advice specifically to people who have left a violent relationship and are maybe dealing with ongoing harassment or stalking. document everything. And I say that because a lot of states, they don't protect people against cyber stalking, and it sometimes can be very difficult to get a restraining order. And I've seen too many stories of, people not getting the proper protection for people who are harassing them and stalking them and popping up at their jobs and, breaking into their homes. And if you don't have that documentation to get that restraining order, it just leaves you open to a lot of violence. And I started the process of getting a restraining order in my past situation, and it was difficult for me. So I think that, I was lucky. I didn't have a restraining order, and it worked out for me. But I think that you probably should not bank on the problem going away on its own. Your safety should be your number one priority, and I would just say to be very very active and very proactive about making sure that you protect yourself, because even if you love this person, even if that person loves you, that doesn't always translate into creating a safe space for you.
Yeah, and those things can exist at the same time.
They can.
Like that's the
A lot of the
that's the
times they
hardest
do.
part.
Yeah, most stalking cases are actually with someone who you have a strong relationship with, not from a total stranger.
Right. Tony.
Yeah, I think I would just empower individuals to find the value in themselves, know that they are worthy, that they're deserving of better and more, that they don't have to be stuck in a situation. Do whatever you can to try and find a confidant, a sacred circle, a resource, someone to talk to, because you'll find that there are a lot of people out there that want to help, that are willing to help, but that might not necessarily know what's going on or know to what extent or detail, and may not want to insert themselves. But take that first step, and that first step can lead to change for the rest of your life. So, Damon.
So I have two things I would say. The first is actually, it has nothing to do with the people in said relationship, but I kept thinking for my own sanity, for people who are not in relationships, to be very mindful of what they say to people in a relationship. And this is positive or negative things. Like complimenting someone on like, oh, I love you guys together, or so on and so forth, when behind closed doors, one of those people could be being abused. People like, I have a personality that's can be very dry humor, like unfriendly at times, sure. And like people jokingly, like people that know me will say things like, oh, I don't know how such and such puts up with you, like that you must be driving them crazy. Meanwhile, there were all these things happening that no one knew anything about that could be driving that negative feeling I had towards that person or whatever it may be. So I think that to just be super mindful of how you approach people who are in a relationship and what you say to them, just because they may be carrying a burden about things that they don't want to talk about publicly, and you're adding to that burden with your expectations and your ideas of like what you think they are.
Right.
And the second thing I would say for someone who has been through an abusive experience is to forgive. And I want to be very clear about what I mean by this. It doesn't mean go back to that relationship. It doesn't mean that you have to necessarily be honky-dory with that person ever in your life again. What I would say is that carrying around hate and vitriol and negativity towards a person will affect you.
Yes.
And I think coming to terms with saying, hey, this is a part of my life that I've lived. I think most recently where I saw it played on a big way, we watched the Tina Turner documentary, and she was saying that, yes, that Ike was a part of my life I don't like to think back on, but it happened, and now that he's dead, she's like, I don't hate him. I don't want to carry that, because when you hate somebody and you are carrying that toxicity in you, it affects you. It affects you and how you live and reflect with yourself personally, and if you want to enter a new relationship going forward.
Right.
And the second part of that, I would say forgiveness towards yourself. I spent a lot of time being hard on myself, trying to figure out why I let this happen, why I put myself in this scenario where this could go on, why I kept going back to it. And it's just like I had to do the work through, you mentioned it, through therapy, through a lot of personal experience and time, to really stop being hard on myself and understanding that I lived my life in a way. There were lessons that I learned from it. And going forward, I hope that I can keep a level of clarity in entering relationships and being around people that reaps the fruit of learning that lesson and applying it going forward.
Yep. Powerful.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's all the time that we have this week. Please let us know what your questions and comments are on this topic on Instagram at Surface Level Podcast or our official website, surfacelevelpodcast.com. We'll be responding to your feedback in our video series, Surface Level Sound Off, on Instagram and YouTube. If you found value in today's topic, please rate, review, and subscribe. And if you or someone you know is experiencing intimate partner violence, please visit our website or our Instagram for more resources. And remember, stay curious.